Step aside. Economy line is over there. The sentence landed flat and sharp, cutting through the steady hum of gate C12. Naomi Carter stopped mid-step, her carry-on still rolling behind her, wheels ticking once, then still. The boarding scanner beeped for the passenger ahead, a clean green light. But for her, the space felt suddenly colder, tighter, like the air had shifted without warning. She turned her head slowly. The flight attendant, young, composed, smile trained but eyes firm, held out a hand, not welcoming, but redirecting. "Ma'am, this is priority boarding." Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her bag. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet recalibration. Around them, people noticed. A businessman in a navy suit paused halfway through checking his phone. A woman behind Naomi adjusted her sunglasses, watching over the rim. Someone farther back lifted their camera just enough to capture the moment without being obvious. Naomi didn't raise her voice. Didn't argue. She glanced down at her boarding pass, the paper slightly creased from a long morning, then back up at the agent. "I'm in the right line," she said, her voice calm, even, carrying just enough to be heard but not enough to invite a scene. The agent's smile didn't move. "I'll need you to step aside so we can keep the line moving." A subtle shift in tone. Polite on the surface, final underneath. Naomi exhaled slowly through her nose. The scent of jet fuel drifted faintly through the open jet bridge, mixing with the sterile chill of the terminal. Behind her, a man muttered, "Here we go," barely under his breath. Another voice, softer. She probably booked basic and got confused. Naomi heard it. All of it. But her posture didn't change. Instead, she stepped half a foot to the side, not in surrender, but to let an older woman behind her pass first. "Go ahead," Naomi said gently, offering a small nod. The woman hesitated, surprised, then moved forward, her own pass scanning with a clean beep. The line resumed, flowing around Naomi like water around a stone. The supervisor appeared moments later. Ethan Blake. Crisp uniform. Measured stride. The kind of presence that filled space without raising volume. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, though his eyes had already made their assessment. Naomi met his gaze. Steady. Unflinching. "I'm trying to board." Ethan's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile. "And we're trying to keep things organized." He glanced at her pass without taking it. "This area is for priority guests." A pause. Just long enough to let the implication settle. Naomi's grip on her bag loosened, then stilled. The runway lights outside flickered through the glass, reflecting faintly in her eyes. No rush. No panic. Just a quiet, deliberate stillness, like she was measuring something no one else could see. The agent shifted beside Ethan, waiting. The scanner beeped again for someone else. Time moved. But around Naomi, it felt like everything had slowed to a single, suspended moment, balanced on the edge of a decision not yet made. The pause stretched just a second too long. Ethan Blake tilted his head slightly, as if giving Naomi one last chance to correct herself without making it official. "Ma'am, if you could just step out of the boarding area, we can resolve this without delaying the flight." His tone stayed smooth, practiced, but there was an edge beneath it now, a quiet assumption that compliance would follow. Naomi did not move. Her carry-on remained beside her, her hand resting lightly on the handle, fingers still. Around them, the line continued to shrink. One by one, passengers scanned through, their footsteps fading into the jet bridge, leaving behind a growing pocket of space that made the moment feel more exposed. A man in a gray blazer leaned toward another passenger and whispered something that ended with a soft chuckle. Naomi heard that too. She heard everything, but her focus stayed on Ethan. "I already told you," she said, her voice calm but firmer now. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Ethan exhaled through his nose, a subtle shift, patience thinning just enough to show. He extended his hand, this time expecting the boarding pass. Naomi looked at it for a moment, then handed it over. The paper brushed against his fingers, light, ordinary. He glanced down. His eyes scanned the print quickly, then, again, slower this time. Something flickered, but it vanished almost instantly. "This boarding group is not active right now," he said, handing it back without meeting her eyes. The statement did not match what the scanner had been doing for the last 5 minutes, but no one around him questioned it. Authority had a way of rewriting what people believed they had just seen. Naomi took the pass back without comment. Behind her, the older woman she had let go first was now gone, already halfway down the jet bridge. The space felt even quieter. The flight attendant shifted her weight, glancing between Naomi and Ethan, waiting for direction. Ethan gave a small nod. "We will need to ask you to step aside now." The words were clearer this time. Not a suggestion, a decision. Naomi's shoulders rose slightly with a slow breath, then settled. She looked past Ethan for just a second, through the wide terminal windows. The runway stretched out under the afternoon light, planes moving in slow, deliberate patterns, engines humming low like distant thunder. Everything out there followed a system. Timing, precision, no mistakes. She brought her gaze back to him. "Before I do that," she said quietly, "I would like you to check again." Ethan's jaw tightened just enough to notice. "I already have." Naomi did not blink. "Then check the system, not the paper." A small ripple moved through the nearby passengers. That sentence landed differently. It carried weight. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. Ethan hesitated for half a second, then turned toward the scanner terminal. His fingers moved across the screen, pulling up the boarding list. Names scrolled. Rows of data. Flight numbers, seat assignments, status codes. The glow from the monitor reflected faintly on his face. Naomi watched him, not with challenge, but with quiet expectation. The kind that did not need to prove anything. The kind that already knew. The screen reflected in Ethan Blake's eyes as the list loaded line by line, each name sliding into place with quiet precision. And for a moment the only sound was the low hum of the terminal and the distant rumble of an engine outside the glass, his fingers hovering just above the keyboard before scrolling again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if searching for something he was not expecting to find. Naomi stood still, watching him, not with impatience, but with a calm that felt almost out of place in a moment like this, the kind of calm that did not come from guessing but from knowing. A faint crease formed between Ethan's brows as his eyes paused on a line, then moved past it, then returned, his posture shifting just slightly as he leaned closer to the screen. "Is there a problem?" the flight attendant asked softly beside him, her voice careful now, no longer as certain as before. Ethan did not answer right away, his jaw tightening as he clicked into the passenger details. More information appearing, more than he had expected, more than he was used to seeing for a standard boarding check. Behind Naomi, a man cleared his throat. Another passenger adjusted their stance, the quiet tension spreading outward in small, almost invisible waves. Naomi's boarding pass rested loosely in her hand now, no longer gripped, just held, like the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond this moment. Ethan straightened slightly, then glanced over his shoulder at her, really looking this time, not just at her clothes or her place in line, but at her face, her posture, the stillness that had not cracked once since this began. He looked back at the screen quickly, as if confirming something he did not want to misread. His fingers moved again, pulling up a secondary panel, restricted access fields blinking briefly before opening. And that was when the shift happened, subtle but undeniable. The kind of shift that does not need words to be understood. The color drained just enough from his expression, the certainty gone, replaced by something tighter, something uncertain. The flight attendant noticed it immediately, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the screen. "Ethan?" she asked again, quieter this time, almost unsure if she should. He swallowed once, the movement small but visible, then cleared his throat. "Just a moment," he said. But the tone had changed, no longer controlled in the same way, no longer absolute. Naomi tilted her head. Just slightly, not in challenge, but in acknowledgement, like she had been waiting for this exact second. The terminal lights above cast a soft glow across the polished floor, reflections stretching beneath them. The world continuing around this frozen pocket of realization. Ethan's hand moved away from the keyboard slowly, like touching it again might confirm something he was not ready to face. He turned toward Naomi fully now, his eyes searching hers, trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the information on the screen. The silence between them deepened, no longer empty but heavy, filled with everything that had just shifted in a single glance. And for the first time since she stepped into the line, Naomi spoke again, her voice steady, quiet, but carrying through the space with unmistakable clarity. "So," she said, her gaze holding his, "did the system say the same thing you did?" The question lingered in the air, quiet but sharp, and for a moment Ethan Blake did not answer, his eyes flicking back to the screen, as if hoping the information would change if he looked at it long enough. But it did not. It stayed there, clear and undeniable. The kind of detail that did not belong to an ordinary passenger profile, the kind that came with layers of access, with authority built into the system itself. His throat tightened slightly as he straightened, trying to gather back the composure that had slipped without warning. There seems to be a discrepancy, he said carefully, each word measured. But the confidence from earlier was gone, replaced by something more cautious. The flight attendant beside him shifted her weight, her earlier certainty dissolving into uncertainty. "What kind of discrepancy?" she asked, her voice lower now. Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze drifting once more to Naomi, really seeing her now, not as someone out of place, but as someone he had failed to place correctly. And that difference mattered. Naomi stood exactly as before, shoulders relaxed, expression steady. But there was something else now, something almost imperceptible, like the stillness of someone who had been patient long enough. The passengers nearby sensed it, too. The subtle change in energy, conversations softened, a phone that had been raised lowered slightly, curiosity shifting into something quieter, more attentive. Ethan cleared his throat again, a small sound that seemed louder in the hush that had formed around them. "Ma'am," he began, the word different this time, no longer dismissive. But he stopped, the sentence unfinished, because the version he had prepared no longer fit the situation in front of him. Naomi did not help him finish it. She simply waited, her gaze steady, giving him the space to reach his own conclusion. The terminal lights above flickered faintly against the polished floor, reflections stretching and bending with every small movement. The world still moving, but slower here, as if the moment had carved out its own pace. Ethan turned back to the terminal one last time, his fingers hovering, then pressing a key that opened a deeper layer of the system, a restricted panel that most staff never needed to access. And as it loaded, the final confirmation settled into place, unmistakable, irreversible. His shoulders stiffened just slightly, and when he turned back again, the shift was complete, not dramatic, not loud, but absolute. The kind of shift that rewrites everything that came before it. The flight attendant noticed it instantly, her posture straightening, her expression tightening with a hint of concern. "Ethan," she whispered. But this time he did not answer her at all. His focus remained on Naomi, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, controlled, but carrying a weight it had not held before. "There has been an error," he said, though the word felt insufficient for what had actually happened. Naomi's eyes held his, calm, unhurried, and for the first time since this began, she took a small step forward, closing the distance by just a fraction, not aggressive, not forceful, just enough to make the moment undeniable. The silence deepened, and somewhere behind them, the boarding scanner gave a soft beep for no one at all, as if the system itself was waiting for the next move. The word error settled between them, but it did not resolve anything. It only made the silence heavier, more defined, like a line drawn too late to matter. Naomi did not respond immediately. She simply studied Ethan's face, the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders held tension now instead of authority, the way his eyes no longer dismissed her but searched for something to hold on to, something that would restore control. But there was nothing left to hold. The moment had already moved past that point. "An error," Naomi repeated softly, not mocking, not accusing, just letting the word exist. For what it was, incomplete, insufficient. The flight attendant swallowed beside him, her earlier confidence gone completely now, replaced by uncertainty that she could not hide. "Should I call someone?" she asked, her voice careful, almost hesitant. Ethan hesitated for half a second, and that hesitation said everything, because before, he would have answered without thinking. Now, he was calculating, weighing consequences he had not considered minutes ago. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, her carry-on wheels turning a fraction of an inch against the polished floor, a small sound that echoed louder than it should have, drawing attention back to her, to the center of this moment. She lifted her boarding pass again, not to present it, but to hold it at eye level for a second, as if reminding him that nothing about this had changed except his understanding. "You stopped me," she said calmly, her voice steady. Without checking the system first, Ethan opened his mouth slightly, then closed it, because there was no clean way to deny that now. Not with the screen still open behind him, not with the information he had just seen. The passengers nearby were no longer whispering. They were watching, fully present, the earlier assumptions fading into something quieter, more uncertain. A man in the gray blazer lowered his gaze, suddenly very interested in his phone again, the shift in perception rippling outward. Naomi took one small step closer, not invading, not aggressive, just enough to make sure her words landed where they needed to. You decided, she continued, before you verified. The sentence hung there, not loud, but precise, the kind that could not be easily dismissed or softened. Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. Not anger, not defensiveness, something closer to realization, the kind that arrives too late to prevent the mistake, but early enough to feel it fully. He glanced once more at the terminal, as if confirming the truth again, but it had not changed. It would not change. Naomi's presence in the system was not just valid, it was elevated, unmistakable, and that reality pressed in on him now from every direction. The flight attendant shifted again, her hands clasping together lightly, unsure where to place them, unsure what role she played in this new version of the moment. Naomi lowered her boarding pass slowly, her expression unchanged, calm, controlled, but there was a quiet finality in it now, like a door that had already closed, and when she spoke again, her voice carried just a little further, not raised, but clearer, more deliberate. So, she said, her eyes holding his, what happens next matters, more than what already happened. And for the first time, Ethan did not have an immediate answer. The authority he had leaned on minutes ago no longer fit the situation, and the silence that followed was no longer his to control. The silence did not break, it deepened, settling into the space like something tangible, something everyone could feel but no one wanted to touch. Ethan Blake stood there with the weight of Naomi's words pressing in from all sides, his authority no longer a shield but something fragile, something that had already cracked. He glanced around briefly, not for approval, but for orientation, as if the world he had been standing in minutes ago had shifted just enough to make him unsure of his footing. The passengers nearby were no longer whispering, no longer amused. They were watching with a different kind of attention now, quieter, sharper, the kind that follows a moment when something real is unfolding. Naomi remained still, her presence steady, her breathing even, her eyes no longer questioning but waiting, not for an apology, not for an excuse, but for clarity. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but heavier than before. I will correct this, he said. Finally, the sentence careful, deliberate, but even as he said it, it sounded incomplete, like a response that addressed the surface but not the depth. Naomi did not interrupt him. She allowed the words to settle, to show themselves for what they were. The flight attendant shifted again beside him, her posture straighter now, almost instinctively aligning with the change in tone, but her eyes remained uncertain, searching Ethan's face for direction, for something solid to hold on to, but he did not offer it immediately. He turned back to the terminal, his fingers moving with less confidence now, more awareness, navigating through menus that suddenly felt more significant, more exposed, each click quieter than it should have been, as if the system itself demanded precision in this moment. Naomi's gaze drifted for a brief second toward the glass windows again, the runway stretching endlessly beyond, planes moving in perfect coordination, no hesitation, no misjudgment, just systems, working as they were designed to. She inhaled slowly, the faint scent of recycled air and distant fuel grounding her, then returned her focus to Ethan, the space between them unchanged in distance but completely different in meaning. Correcting it is one part, she said softly, her voice calm, but carrying through the stillness with unmistakable clarity. Ethan paused mid-motion, his hand hovering above the keyboard. Understanding it is the other, she continued, not louder, but firmer, the kind of firmness that did not come from emotion but from truth. The words landed differently this time, not as a challenge, but as something deeper, something that could not be fixed with a simple adjustment in the system. Ethan's shoulders lowered just slightly, the first visible sign of something shifting internally, something beyond procedure. The flight attendant looked down briefly, her hands tightening together, as if she felt the weight of those words too, even if they were not directed at her alone. The terminal lights reflected faintly off the polished floor, stretching their silhouettes, blending them into the same space. The same moment, Ethan swallowed once, then nodded almost imperceptibly, not fully to Naomi, not fully to himself, but enough to signal that something had changed. And for the first time since this began, the tension was no longer about whether Naomi would board the plane. It was about everything that had happened before that point, everything that could not be undone by a simple correction, and Naomi, standing there with quiet certainty, already knew that. The terminal screen dimmed for half a second, then refreshed, and this time it was not just Ethan who noticed it, a subtle shift in the interface, a new line appearing at the top of the system panel, highlighted in a way that did not belong to standard passenger data. His eyes locked onto it instantly, reading once, then again, slower, as if the meaning might change if he gave it more time, but it did not. The designation was clear, embedded deep within the system hierarchy, not something that could be faked or misread. Naomi Carter did not belong to any boarding group because she was not categorized that way at all. She existed outside of it, above it. Ethan's hand moved away from the keyboard completely now, fingers curling slightly, as if unsure where to rest, the weight of the realization settling fully into place. The flight attendant leaned in just enough to catch a glimpse of the screen, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before she straightened abruptly, her posture shifting into something more formal, more cautious, like an instinct had taken over before her thoughts could catch up. Behind them, a soft chime echoed through the gate speakers, not loud, but distinct, followed by a brief pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. Then a voice came through, calm, precise, unmistakably internal. All boarding operations at Gate C12 are temporarily on hold. Please stand by for system verification. The words landed across the space like a ripple. Conversation stopped completely now. Phones lowered, attention sharpening into silence. Ethan's throat tightened as he looked up slowly, his gaze finding Naomi again. But this time there was no attempt to control the moment, no attempt to redirect it. Only the quiet acknowledgement of what he had missed, what he had misjudged. Naomi did not react to the announcement outwardly, but there was a subtle shift in her stance, a grounding, like the world had finally aligned with something she had known from the beginning. She reached into her coat pocket with a measured motion and pulled out her phone, the screen lighting softly against her palm. She tapped once, then held it briefly, not as a threat, not as a display, but as a continuation of the same quiet certainty she had carried from the start. Ethan watched that movement closely, understanding now that whatever came next would not be dictated by him. Not anymore. The flight attendant stepped back half a step, creating space without being told, her earlier authority replaced by careful distance. The passengers remained still, drawn into the gravity of the moment, not fully understanding it, but sensing its significance. Naomi lowered her phone again, her gaze steady on Ethan, and when she spoke, her voice did not rise. It did not need to. It carried clearly through the silence. The system did not make the mistake, she said, each word measured, deliberate. You did. There was no anger in it, no sharpness, just truth, plain and unfiltered. Ethan inhaled slowly, the air catching slightly before settling, and for the first time, he did not try to respond immediately, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to correct in the way he had approached moments before. The situation had moved beyond procedure, beyond simple resolution. It had become something else entirely, something that demanded more than a quick fix, and Naomi, standing there with quiet authority, had already stepped into that space long before anyone else realized it existed. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and undeniable, and for a moment no one moved, not Ethan, not the flight attendant, not even the passengers who had been watching from a distance, because something had shifted beyond procedure, beyond a simple mistake. It had become a moment of recognition, and everyone could feel it. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly, not in defeat, but in the quiet realization of what had just unfolded. His shoulders no longer squared with authority but held in a more measured, human way. You are right, he said finally. The words steady but stripped of everything they had carried before. No justification, no deflection, just acknowledgement. The flight attendant beside him inhaled softly, her posture adjusting again. More formal now, more careful, as if she had stepped into a different role without being told. Naomi did not react immediately. She allowed the words to exist, to stand on their own without interruption. Her expression unchanged, calm, composed, but there was a quiet finality in her stillness now, like a line had been drawn and understood. Ethan glanced toward the terminal screen once more, then reached for the intercom panel at the side of the gate desk, his hand pausing for just a fraction of a second before pressing the button. The click was soft, but it carried through the silence. Gate C-12 operations, he began, his voice clear, professional, but different now, grounded in something more deliberate. Please note that boarding is temporarily paused due to a personnel review. A subtle ripple moved through the passengers. Not confusion, not frustration, but awareness, the kind that follows when something important is happening just beneath the surface. Naomi watched him without interruption, her gaze steady, not demanding, not pressing, just present. Ethan continued. All current crew assigned to this flight will remain at the gate until further notice. The words landed. Carefully, chosen with intention, not rushed, not reactive. The flight attendant's breath caught slightly beside him, her eyes widening just a fraction before she composed herself again, understanding what those words meant, understanding that this moment was no longer contained, that it had expanded beyond the immediate interaction into something larger, something accountable. Ethan released the intercom button slowly, the faint hum returning as the speaker went quiet again. He turned back to Naomi, his expression no longer guarded, no longer distant, but open in a way it had not been before. I will ensure this is addressed properly, he said, and this time the words carried weight, not because of authority, but because of the shift behind them. Naomi held his gaze for a brief second, measuring, not the words, but the intention behind them, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not approval, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. The terminal lights reflected softly across the polished floor, the world continuing just beyond the edge of this moment. But here, everything felt suspended, defined, and as the silence settled once more, it was no longer uncertain, it was resolved in a way that did not need to be spoken aloud. The gate remained still, not frozen, but settled, like everything had found its place after shifting too far. Naomi Carter stood where she had been from the beginning, her carry-on beside her, her posture unchanged, but the space around her felt different now, clearer, quieter, as if the noise that had surrounded her before had been stripped away. Ethan Blake stepped slightly to the side, not as a command, not as a gesture of control, but as an opening, a path no longer blocked, no longer questioned. The flight attendant mirrored the movement instinctively, creating space without needing to be told, her hands now still at her sides, her expression composed but thoughtful, the kind that comes after understanding arrives too late to prevent the moment, but just in time to learn from it. Naomi did not move immediately. She looked once more at the terminal, at the screen that had held the answer the entire time, then back at Ethan, her gaze steady, not lingering, not searching, just present. He met her eyes briefly, and this time there was no assumption in his expression, no distance, only a quiet recognition of what had happened and what it meant. Naomi reached down, her fingers closing around the handle of her bag, the soft click of the wheels turning again breaking the silence just enough to mark the moment. She stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. The boarding scanner lit up as she approached, a soft green glow replacing the earlier stillness. She held her pass beneath it, and this time, there was no pause, no interruption, just a clean, single tone, clear and final, the sound carrying through the space like a quiet confirmation of something that no longer needed to be questioned. She walked past the gate without looking back, her steps measured, steady, the jet bridge stretching ahead of her in a straight line, lit by soft overhead lights that reflected faintly along the narrow walls. Behind her, no one spoke, not immediately. The passengers who had watched lowered their eyes or turned away, not out of embarrassment alone, but out of a quiet understanding that they had witnessed something more than a delay, more than a mistake. They had seen a moment where perception had failed and truth had quietly corrected it. Ethan remained where he stood, his hands resting lightly at his sides, his posture no longer rigid, his gaze following Naomi for just a second before dropping, not in defeat, but in reflection. The flight attendant exhaled slowly beside him, her shoulders lowering as the tension eased. But the weight of the moment remained, not heavy, not sharp, just present, like something that would stay with them long after the flight had left the ground. Inside the jet bridge, Naomi continued forward, the distant hum of the aircraft growing slightly louder with each step, the air warmer now. Enclosed, steady, she did not slow, did not turn, the light ahead guiding her forward. And as she reached the aircraft door, the world behind her faded into a quiet, distant memory, leaving only the soft rhythm of her steps and the silence that followed, not empty, but full, carrying the quiet sound of something that had been set right without ever needing to be said aloud.